Chapter 28. Leonie ran through the deep. As she did, she tried to soak in every detail she passed. Everything here seemed odd, off. Mosquitoes buzzed, but their buzzing was not the continuous and sharp humming it should have been, but instead came at odd rhythm. Buzz, 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 pause. Hum. And the pause lasted for all of them. A unison free fall for the dozen little mosquitoes flying about the group. Above, obscured by the leaf-laden branches, the birds sang something she could only describe as a dirge. In the distance, permeated a sound like the rushing of water, intertwined with the growling of a rabid dog. Her skin shivered with fear. "Make her taut," Victor said, pulling at his tunic's collar. He walked behind her, one of Fjord's arms over his shoulder. "Don't think about it," Ollie called back. Everything around them grew lush and green. The carpet of brown leaves was gone, and now her boots left prints in loose black soil, which released an aroma of earthy fertility. The trees around them loomed impossibly large, and with every step forward they seemed only to grow. Some were large enough that Leonie could have ridden her whole carriage behind one. Horses and all. And the tops of the trees grew well out of sight. It occurred to Leonie that trees so tall should have been visible back in Watchful by simply looking out at the wood from the hilltop. But that had not been the case, and this was yet another impossibility. It should have been black as pitch down on the forest floor, with a thick cover of branches layered above them. And yet, somehow, enough light always found its way down through the boughs. Even when the sun had set, the moon shined nearly as bright. Yet the light did not shine everywhere. Instead, seeming to illuminate a winding path eastward, one that Ollie sometimes followed and sometimes ignored. Yet, even as eerie as it all was, it was also beautiful. The moonlight illuminated flies and dust motes, while casting black shadows over wide swaths of brush and behind thick trunks. She wanted to paint it, to entomb this moment in a frame of permanence. She paused only long enough to commit it all to memory as best she could. Ollie proved true to his word. He ran and gave no sign of looking backward or waiting for the others. Even before Fjord had stepped into the deep, the woodsman had been moving as if a demon were on his heels. Leonie kept up for now, but she could already feel her lungs warming and her breath coming in less controlled gasps. Perhaps pride blinded her, but she viewed herself fit enough for war. Like all Trevlarian nobility, she was no stranger to hard physical feats. Long hikes in plated armor, hours on the practice field, days in the saddle. When she had been faced with the fiery blades of the Elmes, she had been prepared, and she had held her own for hours. And yet this seemed too brutal. Pain stitched her side, her mouth grew dry, and her head felt light. A full day's march with no food or rest, followed by a sprint over several miles. It was inhuman. Around her, the rangers began to breathe uneasily, ragged even. Leonie glanced back and saw Fjord's cheeks flushed red, sweat drenching his face as he limped along at a frantic pace. Tall's lips, usually thin and pressed tight, opened wide, her nose flaring. How long could they keep this up? And still the woodsman showed no sign of slowing. His steps were sure, his head up and active, his bow at the ready. He even jumped over tall roots or rocks. Jumped! He may as well have been a boy sprinting through a familiar stretch of countryside after a day in school. He had been holding back. Admitting that truth tasted like a sour medicinal, pungent and strong. A commoner was putting her and her best soldiers to shame. Orelda was Leonie's only comfort. Beside Fjord, the woman struggled more than anyone else. Her cheeks had grown pale and sweaty, her breathing becoming uncontrolled. At this rate, Ollie's mother would collapse, and then where would they be? Ollie looked behind him for a moment, eyes narrowing. If we don't pick up the pace, we'll be in trouble. Twit, Victor muttered. Leonie's mind could not even begin to process what Ollie had said. A Maifa scholar might as well have stepped into a nursery to discuss the complexities of naval engineering to toddling children, for all that her mind could fathom his words. Leonie said nothing, unsure what else she could say, and not wanting to waste a single breath of air. Orelda called back, words bitten out between strained gasps. Slow down. Ollie slowed and turned, though he bounced in place on his toes. Ollie, this is why you should have stayed at home. Shut it, Orelda said, letting out a gust of air and stumbling to a walk a few paces from Ollie. You don't speak to me that way. Everyone else followed Orelda's lead, falling into a walk as they caught up to Ollie. Leonie's head grew light, and her eyes and forehead seemed eerily cold. Stay upright, stay upright. Someone behind her coughed, then gagged, and vomit splattered the forest floor a moment later. The woodsman's nose flared, and his fists clenched. His head kept twisting this way and that, as if waiting for someone to pop out from the darkness beyond and swallow him whole. We have to move. Now. Leonie raised a finger. 1 minute. There isn't time. We move or we die. Orelda coughed and shook her head, muttering, I'm sorry. Ollie growled but said nothing. Tall walked around the edge of the group, staring into the shadows around them, head cocking to one side, listening. Sorry, Orelda muttered again, and bent over, beads of sweat falling like raindrops. Ollie spat into the dirt, then looked off in the same direction as Tall. What? Leonie asked, hands on her knees, chest heaving. Memories of vines were fresh enough that she kept fidgeting and turning around. A howl pierced the night, cutting through sounds of frantic breathing like razor to a taut canvas. It dragged on, loud and long. When it ended, the echo lingered on the breeze. Wolves? Victor asked, looking at Ollie. Fjord coughed, then knocked an arrow. We should go, Leonie said, already moving eastward. Too late. Running won't do no good. Ollie did not bother to look her way. Watch your feet for vines, but get ready for a fight. They're just wolves, Tall said, raising an arrow. They won't attack a group this large. Ollie snorted. There'll be a lot of them. You can hear it in the shake of the ground. And they're pissed, I think. Pissed? Victor grunted, planting his feet. They might be holding a grudge. No one bothered to ask. Leonie unsheathed her sword, the weight of it giving her confidence, if only a little. Whatever stalked out there, she could handle it. She was Leonie Baudelaire, Princess of Trevellar. She owned this land. It would not be frightened. A vine glided down from above, near Tall. Leonie stepped forward and cleaved it clean through. Fjord, she said, gesturing to other vines writhing about. He nodded and pulled his sword free, hobbling about and cutting the vines before they could get too close. Leonie tried not to look his way. He was a dead man, and they all knew it. She only hoped his sacrifice would gain her one more step toward Star Davna. Remember the kingdom, Leonie thought, tightening her grip on the sword. I don't like how quiet it is, Victor said. Leonie realized it the moment he said it. There was no howling, no bird calls, no fluttering of insect wings. Only silence. And all the weight that brings. Once, when she was only 14, she had been on a ship during a storm. She had been shoved below deck before the worst of it, but she could still remember watching the horizon and dark clouds rush in. There had been a silence just like this, minutes before the winds and rains nearly capsized them. She had never forgotten the silence, for it was the kind of silence that promised violence. Oli muttered into that silence, his words unintelligible, the rhythmic poetic. That language, Leonie thought. She hungered to know more, to learn whatever secrets those words held, whatever magic they held. For that is what it had to be, magic. There, Tall said. A ragged wolf, mouth covered in dry blood, stepped into a distant stretch of moonlight. Wolf proved a loose term. The size of a small pony, muscles squirming beneath matted fur, the wolf had a stench like tar and sulfur, and its eyes were wrong, slitted like a snake's. Oi, you all again, Oli called out, pulling his bowstring back. The wolf dodged to the side, disappearing behind a large bow. Fjord stepped beside Leonie, far enough away that she could swing her own sword, but close enough to protect her flank. Ain't right, Victor said, voice angry in the way that signaled his fear. That ain't natural. We can handle one. We can handle one, Fjord said. And then the howls sounded from everywhere. 2 at first, then 5 or more. So loud, the sound of them wormed its way into her ears. Even as the last of the howls died away, wolves dashed out from behind tree trunks and into the open, bearing down on them. Shoot, Tall said. Victor and Tall's skill showed. And 2 wolves tumbled to the ground, arrows sticking from their eyes. But another half dozen more appeared in their place, and none of the group had time to loose a second arrow. Or no one except Oli. His body became a blur, and he loosed 3 arrows in quick succession, sidestepping to stand before his mother as he did. 2 more wolves fell from his flurry, but the rest fell upon them. A wolf charged Leonie, leaping its jaws towards her forehead. Leonie stepped to the side and swung her sword, her weight moving to her back foot as she dodged. The move took much of the power away from the swing, but the blade's tip should have easily bitten through the animal's hide. Should have. Leonie drew blood on the wolf as it flew by, but the blade's edge only made a shallow cut. The beast landed on its paws, twisted around, and then lashed out toward her with claws like small knives. Leonie stepped backward, praying nothing attacked from behind, and she began slicing upward in a parry. Each of her blocks left little cuts along the wolf's paws, once, twice, then 3 times. The wolf paused, then, crouching low, and growled. Leonie did not wait for its next attack, but lunged forward. The wolf sidestepped, then lurched toward her throat. Leonie shifted her weight onto her front foot, mid-lunge, twisting and leaning backward, bringing her blade down in a wide arc. The speed and strength of it cut into the wolf's neck, nearly severing it in 2. Leonie stumbled, then felt the weight of another wolf slam into her chest, sending her tumbling to the ground. Her backside hit the ground for the 3rd time that day, and for one instant Leonie felt more annoyed than frightened, and the wolf's jaws were snapping at her throat. Instinct alone saved her. She dropped her sword, brought up her forearm, just as the wolf bit down. The chainmail sleeve protected her arm, but she felt enough pressure to fear her bone may break. Humid, rotten air poured from the wolf's mouth and warmed her face. She yelled and grabbed the knife at her hip, pulling it free and slamming it down toward the wolf's face. The mangy beast reared back. The blade lodged firmly in its eye. Leonie sucked in cool air as the beast skittered backward. Fjord stumbled into view, his blade coming down hard on its back, ending its pained screams. Leonie scrambled to her feet, grabbing her sword as she went. She twisted, looking around for the next attack, but none came. The fighting had ended, the sudden way all fights did. Blood covered the ground, glistening like pools of water on the street of Turris Regis after a rain. Wolves lay dead or dying all around, their unnaturally large bodies strewn in odd contortions, most still twitching in the throes of death. No one ever talked about it, but swords and arrows rarely killed anything quickly. They brought pain and blood loss, things that took time. Tal was safe, her face ashen. She stood above an arrow-ridden wolf's corpse, beneath which a pair of boots stuck out, unmoving. Victor. And just like that, another one of her rangers was dead. Rangers volunteered, Leonie reminded herself. They were not conscripted. They chose to serve at some point. Victor had the opportunity to say no, and he had not. Tal covered her face with her left hand and said a prayer, then walked toward Fjord. His face had grown pale, his breathing heavy, and he nursed a small gash on his neck. Tal put her arm around him and spoke something into his ear. "Thank you," Fjord said, blood gushing from his neck as he spoke. His death looming so close, Leonie could nearly touch it. Leonie walked away. Orelda and Ollie had fared fine. Orelda's hands shook frantically and her mouth parted in shock, but she lived. And though Ollie's boots looked as if he had stomped through puddles of blood, and his quiver had been half emptied, his face looked as passive as ever. "The vines are coming," Ollie said, reaching into the quiver on his mother's back and removing a few arrows. It looked as if she had not touched a single one. "We gotta go." "Wait," Tal said, turning to Ollie. Fjord knelt, his breath coming in low rasps. "Just give us one." "Leave the dead," Ollie said, then grabbed his mother's arm and made eastward. Leave the dead. Leonie looked to Fjord, and when he looked back, she met his bloodshot eyes as best she could. With a sigh, Leonie stepped over and knelt beside Fjord, placing her hand on the man's shoulder. She would never rid herself of this memory. Fjord's eyes were losing focus, his face growing pale. Leonie brought his face up toward hers, waiting until his eyes focused for the briefest of moments. "Metimi, so staulo, sto paradiso," she said. "With honor, I send you to paradise." Fjord grasped her wrist, his mustache stained with blood and snot. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Behind him, Leonie could see vines pushing their way across the ground. "Come," Ollie called. "Your Highness," Tal said, eyes dancing from Fjord, Leonie, and the woodsman. Leonie watched the vines, the memory of her own near death still at hand. If she left him, Fjord would die alone. The man could not speak, but his eyes pleaded with her. He knew what would come. Leonie pried her wrist free from Fjord's own and whispered, "I will not let them have you." "Your Highness," Tal said, voice desperate, "we have to go." Leonie said nothing, only stepped behind Fjord and raised her blade. "Deus take your soul, Fjord of the King's Spear."